Everyone had lunch today? Everybody full? Okay, so if you fall asleep in my session, I get to throw the mic at you. That was Daniel Kalinda last night, you remember? So he's going to throw the mic. I won't throw it, I promise. But we will make fun of you. That's fair game, right? So this topic of compassion and humanitarian disasters is as Muslim said before, it's massive. This is huge. So I'm going to approach this really on a personal level, if you don't mind. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story so you understand. I'm involved in compassion ministry through the ministry of Convoy of Hope. I'm going to start my presentation telling you a little bit about Convoy of Hope. They've been around for 40 years, and I was introduced to them in 2008. And it was at a point where I was trying to figure out what compassion was all about. And we're going to talk a little bit about the meaning of compassion, how compassion plays into our life. And you see, I do believe, though, that when I'm finished speaking, I want you to understand that being a compassionate believer in Jesus is who you should be. All right, let me say this. In other words, you cannot be a Christian and incompassionate at the same time. In other words, let me say it again. If you are a Christian, then you are compassionate. You represent Christ. That's what we are, Christians. We are Christ-like. We are Christ to many people. And Christ was compassionate. So we have to be compassionate. So Convoy of Hope works across the world. They do four things. They feed children, 174,000 each day. As a matter of fact, they work in 4 countries in Africa. They have a massive disaster relief effort. They empower women. They have these women empowerment programs. The biggest one being in Addis Ababa, which is very successful. I think they have 100 women. And I'll tell you a little bit about that at the end of the video. And the fourth and final piece, they are agricultural developers. In other words, they go into a country, they teach people how to farm. They don't just give them seeds and walk away, but I literally teach them, here's what you sow at this time of year in this soil, here's what will grow. So Convoy of Hope, though, what they've become known for is disaster relief. Miles, what you said earlier is so true. The earth is burping and constraining and pulling itself apart. There are disasters happening at an alarming rate. In America, last year, within the last 7 months, we had 4 massive hurricanes come through our region. And that's unusual. That is not normal. We might have 1 per year, maybe. But to have 4 in one hurricane season, that is almost unheard of. And so I want to show you a little report from Convoy of Hope from the work that they did during this unusual hurricane season. And then we'll pick up on the presentation at the end. So let's see if I can get this started properly.
Where are we at today? I think we're about 4 weeks removed from the hurricane, but where are things today?
Here in Puerto Rico, it's been a hard grind. We have 11 major distribution centers around the island, and from there we're reaching out to other communities. The total is around 70 communities that we've reached through those 11 hubs.
Thanks to Convoy of Hope, there's no bureaucracy, there's no technicalities. We're just going straight to the families, door by door.
Thank God for Convoy of Hope. You are the first response in this area.
Had it not been for Convoy of Hope, truly we wouldn't have had the tools.
So Hal, 2 major earthquakes struck here and literally it impacted hundreds of thousands of lives. And today they estimate at least 500,000 people are homeless and displaced. But the reality is hope is on the rise. Because of our network of partners, we've been able to distribute 98,000 meals already. We just believe that good things are happening because people are reaching out in kindness.
Today we're in Port Arthur, Texas, doing cleanup and debris removal of homes that were flooded. This whole neighborhood had about 2 feet of water in it. Not only are the volunteers doing the tear out, but it's all coming out here. We're loading in a truck and we're doing the haul off, so we're doing the full deal here.
Convoy of Hope came out when no other entity came out. I love you.
We would be stuck without you guys. And this is a long-term project, so we still need your help.
To date, Stacy, what have we been able to accomplish here in Texas?
Just here, we've had over 160 tractor-trailer loads of resources delivered, which has allowed us to serve over 250,000 individuals with over 5 million pounds of resources.
It was complete devastation. Windows were blown out, roofs were ripped off, everything inside was soaking wet. For the level of devastation, it's surprising that only 5 people died.
This is amazing. How did all this happen?
Thanks to an amazing donor, we were able to get a 300-foot ship full of $2 million worth of supplies. Right now, we have teams making meals every day for the children of this island.
Irma came up from the southwest in this town here called Flagler Beach. It was kind of like right in the crosshairs of Irma coming up from the south and the band of rain coming in from the Atlantic, and it landed right here. Unreal. Ever since the inception of Irma, we've been distributing resources throughout the entire state. You know, it was heavy in the news for the first week, and after that it disappears from the media quickly, but it doesn't mean that the need has disappeared.
This is going to take a while to recover from this. This isn't just fixing your roof and moving back in your home. And like I said, we could not have done it without Convoy of Hope. You were just our knight in shining armor.
That's Convoy of Hope. How many of you have heard of Convoy of Hope? Anyone? One person? 2 people? Let's make sure I get the right PowerPoint here. Oops. So Convoy of Hope was very busy in the last 7 months. And in that 7 months, they've impacted hundreds of thousands of lives. Let me see if I can get this full screen. Could you? How do I get this full screen? Slideshow. But what I want to talk to you about is about Christian compassion. So Convoy of Hope is a Christian organization. They are in Springfield, Missouri. A lot of believers work at Convoy of Hope. They have offices across the world. But yet there's a driving call that is built around the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I want to talk a little bit about Christian compassion and what does that mean for each of us. Clearly, I'm not the technical one. Oh, there you go. All right. Christian compassion. Let's see if I can do this without. You know, the word compassion, you know, you could do research through the internet, Oxford Dictionary, all sorts of ways, but there is really only one common thought that prevails, and that is to care for another. Now, this word compassion means that you put yourself secondary to someone else's need. One of the most famous stories in the Bible is the story of the Good Samaritan, left for dead, and yet 3 Christians walk by before someone actually talks to him. So this idea for compassion is buried in that story, where the idea of being a Christian is to care for another. When you think about caring for another, I have to tell you about my journey. 2008, I went to Kenya. It wasn't my first trip to Kenya, but I went as a board member for Convoy of Hope, and we were visiting and validating some of the sites that we were working at. I thought I was filled with compassion. I thought I knew what compassion was until I met this young lady. To protect her, I just only used half of her face, but my screensaver, I have two pictures as my screensaver. Hers is one, and I'll show you the other in a minute. Her name is Sarah. When I met Sarah, we were feeding children, 1,000 people, Mathare Valley, as many of you know, from Kenya. Right, brother? You're from Kenya. So Mathare Valley is a pretty dicey place to live. It's, I think is it 1 square mile with 700,000 people living? I mean, if that was the right math, if I remember correctly. But it's and there's a little school where kids come every day and Convoy of Hope feeds them. So I had a chance to feed these people. I watched this little girl come towards me in the line, and it was Sarah, but she was caring for another girl. And the other girl looked weak and maybe even sick, but Sarah brought her up and got a plate and took it back to her, and I watched as she sat. Sarah sat with this little girl and fed her over on the side. And I thought, here is this little girl, she has nothing, but yet she is able to share in compassion. Later on that day, I would come to learn that Sarah had a terrible life in Mathare Valley. Abused and left abandoned by her family. She was taken in by the school principal and raised. But Sarah showed me that day, having nothing, she gave everything. And to me, that defined compassion. Sharing, having nothing, she shared everything. I didn't see Sarah eat lunch that day. I didn't see her go back in line because we were there feeding kids. I didn't see her come through. But she, to me, defined compassion. She had nothing, but yet what she had, she gave away. I don't know about you, but that touched me drastically. Because I thought, because I was tithing and I was giving offerings and I would send money to an orphanage or I'd help this ministry or that thing over there, that I was doing God's work and I was giving something of myself. But indeed, Sarah was giving everything and she had nothing. She didn't eat that day. The next picture on my screensaver at home is Fred. My kids know him as Freddie. Fred, when I met him in Mathare Valley, it was 6 p.m. at night. It was getting dark. I had that experience with Sarah. I kind of met her a little bit more, and I ended up meeting this little guy, Fred. Fred was in the dumps. He was maybe 5 years old, and he had no parents. But he was adopted by a gang lord. And my heart was wrenched because here is this little guy holding on to my pant leg, asking to be rescued. What could you do? Well, what we did was we ended up leaving Mathare Valley, and later that night at 1 a.m, coming back and rescuing Fred. And that, to me, was a big deal. Except what happened next was amazing. The next morning, Fred got up, realizing where he was, and went back into the village to get his sister, his baby sister, his 9-month-old baby sister. We didn't even know he had a sister. He's 5, he goes back. He left the safety of Mathare Valley School to go find his sister. That, to me, was compassion. And I want to challenge us all to think about this word compassion as it relates in our own life. Certainly, we can't be Fred, or we all can't be Sarah, but we can learn to have compassion, because without love, we are tinkling glass or clanging cymbals. And that's really what compassion is. It's love. It's loving another enough to do something about it. Compassion provides loves, and love provides hope. And you, my brothers and sisters, are hope. If there's an answer to today's humanitarian crisis or compassion crisis, it's those of you sitting in this room. It's all of us together being love, demonstrating love. So if we are going to demonstrate love, we have to be compassionate. We have to be Christ. So there are 1,000 scriptures, passages of scriptures that talk about compassion in the scripture. Compassion, caring for the poor, the suffering, the widow, the homeless, the elderly, is one of those themes that made it from the Old Testament to the New Testament. All right, so along with tithing, baptismal, all of those themes made it through the scriptures. So serving the least has really made it all the way through. So being compassionate, being Christ is one thing. Can I hear an amen? All right, so we have to be Christ, therefore we have to be compassionate. So I want to be quickly about this, and I want to share with you 10 things that I believe that we have to be in order to be compassionate. All right, so this is a little academic, so don't fall asleep on me, nudge the person next to you. But if you enjoy this kind of thing, you're going to find some kind of interesting information as I go through here. So you always have to start with yourself as you deal with anything in life. You got to deal with who you are, your own issues, your own challenges. But the best way to learn how to be compassionate toward others is to be compassionate with yourself. Have you ever met somebody who are just tough on himself? You know, they're never perfect, they don't do anything right, they're constantly correcting themselves, or they put themselves down, right? You have to be compassionate. Praise yourself sometimes. You ever say to yourself, hey, nice job? Now, I'm not saying brag in public. I'm just saying to yourself, say, hey, you did pretty good today. You had a good day today. You woke up. Right? You got up, you got out of bed, you got to work, and you may have even done it on time. I tell my staff sometime, look, you need to give yourself a little credit. Just say, hey, nice job. You did it. You pulled through. You got, my wife always used to say, so we have this thing in our home about me going to the grocery store. I don't know if any other man can relate to this, but if I go to the grocery store and it's before dinner, I will buy all sorts of things. I'm supposed to get a chicken and some celery or some carrots, but if it's before dinner, oh man, I'm getting tomatoes, I'm getting onions, I'm getting bread, and I'll come in the house, and I used to say, hey, didn't I do good? And she'll say, look, all I wanted was the carrots. That's really all I wanted, but she goes, you did good. So that little encouragement, encourage yourself. Have a little fun with yourself. Tell yourself you did good. Now, we live in this one slide could be forever, but we live and communicate on two planes, verbally and non-verbally. So your non-verbal cues are as important as your verbal cues. How you talk, make eye contact, look at people, your body, keep your body towards the conversation. You ever talk to someone whose arms are folded? Man, they're not listening to a word you're saying. Because if their arms are open, they're open to your suggestions. Now, why is this important to compassion? Because compassion is you communicating Christ to others. Simple. So before you go feeding the hungry, how about just being compassionate towards your neighbor or the person sitting next to you in the pew? Also, active listening, which I really love. So how many of you practice active listening? So basically, it's just this. Someone says something to you, right? So someone says, you know what, I really had a hard week, and man, I wish I could find a job. the easy way for them to know you love them, care about them, is say, hey, so you've had a hard week and looking for a job is tough. And they go, yes, someone heard me. You'll be surprised, just that little interaction, what that does for them. It means that someone is listening, because most people aren't. Most people are not listening to them. And also, this last one is a big one. Don't ask closed questions, yes or no answers. How was your day? Great. No. Just say, so what was fun today? What did you enjoy doing today? Open-ended questions. So what you're looking for in your verbal and non-verbal communications is how you build a relationship, right? So compassion comes from the heart, and your heart is longing for these relationships. Everybody get that one? Is that okay? Any questions about that? I'm going to go one by one and just ask questions. We got a little time. Nope? All right, so I'm doing pretty good, feeling good about myself. What was number one? Tell yourself you're doing good. You'll be all right. All right, number 3, touch someone. Okay, they teach this in medical school. When they do an exam, if you notice your doctor sometimes says, how you feeling, Miles? You doing okay? A little tap on the shoulder goes a long way. A little tap on the arm, a little hole of the elbow or shake of the hand. A human touch. You'd be surprised, many people go through a whole day without being touched by another human being. Do you know that? They go through a whole day, a whole week, without someone shaking their hands or saying hello or hugging them. This is important. The human touch takes away the edge. Now, sometimes you should ask, hey, can I hug you? If it's appropriate, do you mind? But oftentimes a soft touch of the hand demonstrates that you genuinely care, you genuinely mean it. I would say this is something I found to be true, especially with the older generation. They're maybe living alone, and oftentimes that little touch means the world. And there's a lot of research. So, by the way, I should say, all of these items, the 10 items, were culminated from research. So we've looked at Pew Research and some Nielsen Understanding, Renterac, all of that, trying to get to the top of these. Any questions about this one? Anybody experience this? Do you agree with it? All right. That doesn't mean that when you're preaching a sermon you have to leave the pulpit and come hug people. Does not mean that. But this morning was interesting. This morning I was moderating or hosting, and I had people hug people, shake hands. Someone said to me, I'm so glad you did that because it warmed me up. I thought that was it because it was cold this morning in the building. 4, encourage others. When we praise and encourage others, we can sometimes kickstart a positive spiral of behavior in that person. A lot of times when you meet someone, you don't know where they are. You don't know where they are. You don't know how difficult their day has been. And you don't know kind of what's been the reality of their life. See, a lot of times people can fake it, right? They come to church, they got their suit on, they got their dress on, and they look good, they smell good. But beneath the surface, there is all sorts of stuff going on. Family issues, financial issues, health issues. And so just a little praise, boy, you look good today. Boy, you dressed up. Or, you encourage someone with simple phrases. A simple word of encouragement goes a long way. And sometimes what you're doing, a psychologist called it stemming. You stem a negative spiral. So they may be, when you meet them, they may be on their way down. They may be kind of having a difficult time. But just a word of encouragement could stem a negative trend. I'm not reading these, verbatim. Express yourself. Don't assume that because you're dealing with someone else's emotions, that your own emotions have no place in the interaction. Match your facial expressions to your felt emotions so that you let the other person know you understand. In other words, do not be placid. Do not let your face die when you talk to someone. Sometimes they're telling you a story, and man, it's hard to, stay alert, stay awake. But let your face, go with them and let your emotions. If you're surprised, be surprised. If you're hurt by their hurt, Say, wow, ooh, I feel your pain. People want to know you connect with them, and oftenly nonverbal and these expressive ideas. I will say, a good laugh goes a long way. If you've got a good joke, my dad used to always, he had 4 jokes he told all the time. He was a missionary. He had 4 jokes. And I know the variations of those jokes, right? So sometimes it's a pastor in a field, sometimes it's a guy in a bar. I mean, it's always, but my dad had 4 standard jokes that he would always tell. But it always have the same end, the laughter at the end. And one of those jokes had to do, I won't tell it. No, all right. So my dad used to tell this joke about there's a preacher and a pastor going to church. They're both on the street, and they're going to church. And they passed, the first church had a cross, and they didn't go in. The second church had a small cross, and they didn't go in. The last church had no cross whatsoever, didn't even look like a church, and they both went in. And so one pastor says to the preacher, why are you coming into my church? He goes, well, because, you're a pastor, and I'm a preacher, and you need Jesus, and I don't. You get the joke? All right. So my dad had versions of that. Sometimes it would be an evangelist walking with somebody. I mean, just on and on. But the point is, if you have these simple little ploys, tell jokes. People will enjoy that. Express yourself. Any questions about that? No? Okay. Show kindness. Give yourself away without expecting anything back. I have to say that this is hard to do, because there's part of us that when we give something, we expect. And that's biblical. It really is. Because, when Christ died on the cross, he was doing it, he gave his life so that we would live abundantly, right? So there was a transaction. But in like Sarah's case, she gave something to this other little girl, and I guarantee you she wasn't thinking about the return. But when you are serving others, you cannot be expecting something else to happen to you. You can't. Otherwise, you're doing it with wrong motives. But when you're showing kindness, just be with them. Be kind. The person you are being kind to benefits through your help, and you'll feel good having helped them. And the world is better through your kindness. Now, there is a spiritual principle. So I'm also with Oral Roberts University, and we believe in seed, time, and harvest, right? Oral Roberts preached that. I'm a product of that environment. And I do believe that when you're kind to others, what you make happen for others, God will make happen for you. Now, I am not kind because I'm looking for someone to be kind for me. But I do know that as a residual benefit, it's going to come back to me. I don't know how, I don't know when, but it's going to come back. So if you're, now this goes to, I don't want to get off into financial things, but it's the same thing with finances. If you give stingily, Scripture said, you'll receive stingily. If you give mightily, you'll receive mightily. It's simple biblical principles. Number 7, respect privacy. A lot of times when you meet someone and they want to have a discussion with you, they don't want to do it in public, right? But sometimes you do, right? Because you're in the corner and you got them cornered. And it's like, now I can help you. Now we can talk about this. But be attentive to someone's personal privacy. Protect their dignity. Shut the door. Pull the curtain. Don't gossip. Remember that sometimes people just need to go for a walk, see a movie, get ready to listen. So the key is just allowing them to talk. And then when they talk, you listen. Moving on. Number 8, learn how to advocate. An advocate is a person who speaks up and defends the right of another person by helping them communicate their needs in a challenging situation, such as a hospital visit. To effectively advocate, you must actively listen to what your friend needs and communicates in an assertive and respectful manner. What this is talking about is when you go to the hospital, you ever been to the hospital sometimes and the person in the hospital is not able to really speak for themselves? That happened to me recently. I went to visit a friend of mine in the hospital, and he had just had surgery on his side vein, I can't remember the name of it. but he was unable to talk, but he was really discomforted, and he wasn't able to communicate to the nurses. But I was able to go to the nurses station and say, look, I think my friend really is hurting. She came in and realized that he was in distress, but he was not able to say it for himself. And I think we have to be advocates for those who can't speak for themselves. Volunteer. Give your time away. How many of you here volunteer in church, right? Through your organizations? Give your time away. You're going to hear from Peter Pretorius here in a minute about his organization, but I'm sure there are many organizations like yours that would love to have volunteers. People to say, hey, I'll come volunteer a certain time of day of the week. Because when you give your life away, you can use your skills, stuff that you do at work for a different cause. Spend time helping people is good for your body, mind, and soul. Finally, consider your words. This is a big one. Think before you speak. At its heart, compassion is about paying attention to the present moment with a loving attitude. Simple things like turning off your cell phone when you visit with someone. You know, have you ever talk to someone and they're looking at their cell phone? You know, you're trying to talk to them and they're looking down. I mean, it really is distracting. You know, and they do it all the time. But wouldn't that be cool if you saw them go and they put it in their pocket? That tells you something. It tells you that, oh, they're going to pay attention to me, and they're going to look me in the eye, and they're going to be with me in this moment. One of the lost arts is the handwritten thank you note. When's the last time you typed somebody an email saying, thank you for praying for me, or thank you for a soda, or a handwritten note? Do you know what that does to someone when they get a note from you? It means that you care and that you're willing to say thank you. So in these top 10 compassion elements, what we're saying is being compassionate is being Christ. But before we start caring for the world, we need to be compassionate ourselves, right? This is not an option as a believer. This is not something you get to opt into or you volunteer. This is a commandment to love one another. That's what Scripture says. The 11th commandment, we are to love one another. We are to care for one another. We are to be compassionate for. It's really easy to care for someone after they've had a major hurricane or earthquake or some national disaster. That's easy. What's hard is caring for your neighbor, the person next door, the person that you see at church on Sunday morning. So my challenge to you as I wrap up my presentation is that while the world needs your compassion, your neighbor needs it almost more. Thank you for listening.